Here on the channel, I definitely cover Marvel and DC more than other publishers. It makes sense. They are the big two for a reason. But we definitely need to acknowledge the insane boom going on, no pun intended, in the indie comic scene. The sales that we've seen are absolutely insane, especially when you compare them to the same time period just before the pandemic shutdown happened. The numbers for like the top selling hit indie comic books are absolutely staggering in comparison to the past numbers that they had. And really the numbers across the board are eye-opening when you look at them in comparison to where they were before the pandemic shutdown happened. Image Comics, Boom Studios, all of them are really having tremendous growth. I think the only one that has lower sales right now might be IDW, but they're kind of losing all their licenses, and even they are transitioning over to creator-owned IP. And I think that's kind of like the changing landscape. A lot of comic book creators have decided, you know what? I don't really need Marvel and DC to really carve out a place in the industry and make a living. Why give my best stuff to Marvel and DC? I would rather own my stuff. I could go do that for Image. I could probably go do that for IDW. It kind of looks like that's what they're doing now. Why give it away when I could own all the rights myself? And if it ever makes it to Netflix or Amazon or a streaming platform that we haven't even seen yet, I'll get in on the revenue and whatnot. Why should Scott Snyder stick around on DC Comics and create the next Court of Owls when he's not really going to benefit from it like he probably should? Hey, let me go over to the indie scene, let me create Noctera, and perhaps that property ends up on streaming or whatever, and I make a lot of money. We talked about during the initial days of the pandemic shutdown that we were going to see a rapid change and evolution in the comic book market, and we've certainly seen that. And I think a lot of creators see Marvel and DC as an opportunity to make a name. You go over there, maybe you get to write the Batman story, and once people really like you and you got your hit series over on Boom or Image or whatnot, then you leave, you go to Substack or you go wherever, and you really start making your name and you really start cashing in on it, which is obviously what James Tynion has done. So let's get directly to these numbers. Obviously, I promised that to you. These are staggering. Let's go look at the numbers from March of 2020. These are all the comic books that sold over 30,000 copies. It's about 50 in total. And of course, you see the comic books that you would expect to see in there, but you don't see your first indie comic book until number 21, Decorum, the very first issue at 47,000. Then you see Mirka Andolfo's Mercy at number 25 with 46,000. Then we see Spawn all the way down there at 45. Todd McFarlane's Spawn universe has obviously gotten much bigger at this point. We're going to cover that here in a second, sitting around 35,000. And that is miraculous, really. When you look at the sales of Spawn and the history of it, that thing was down to like 11,000 sales a month before Todd McFarlane really revitalized that series. And then there at the bottom at 53, just over 30,000 sales is Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like a crossover book from Boom Studios. You'd expect something like that with two high-profile brands to really do well, and obviously it did. Now let's go look at the numbers from March of 2022. These are estimated sales from Diamond Comics as far as distribution, and these are mostly indie titles. Obviously, you will get some Marvel stuff in there because Diamond is still a wholesaler of Marvel Comics as well, but look at those numbers up there. Something is Killing the Children, number 21, over 120,000 issues combined between the number 1 and number 5 ranked titles. Those are the same comic book with a different cover. That is enormous. Those are fucking Batman numbers. That is awesome. Obviously, Spawn has grown quite a bit. It's over double the sales that it was doing just 2 years ago. Spawn, Scorch, we've had the return of Saga. Little Monsters, that's a debut. Rogue Sun, part of the shared Image superhero universe. Gunslinger Spawn, Spawn, King Spawn. Yes, Spawn is absolutely kicking ass. Shocked to see the TMNT ongoing title there because that series is so bad. But obviously sales have dramatically picked up there as well. We have Demons, another number 1 issue. Radiant Red, another one of those titles in the shared Image superhero universe being crafted by Ryan Higgins and Ryan Parrott over there at Image Comics. And then Noctera number 8 with Scott Snyder and Tony Daniel on there. 13 titles in total above 30,000, an increase of 350% prior to the pandemic shutdown. And this doesn't include BRZRKR, which is always selling a ton of titles. That's always over 50,000, but it took a skip month in March of 2022. That is enormous growth. That is really exciting. And I think the lack of quality over at Marvel and DC not only are driving people to manga, but obviously they're going to the direct market, they're supporting their comic book retailers, and they're finding other titles that they're interested in. And there's a ton of really cool genre stuff out there. Obviously, the big one is Something is Killing the Children, which does have the spin-off House of Slaughter series from James Tynion. Me personally, I'm not the biggest James Tynion fan in the world, but obviously people are loving that comic book, and that is awesome. And that thing has really grown over time. It started out, it had a really dedicated fan base. They told their friends about it. They jumped in, and now it can sell over 120,000 copies in a month, you know, with an extra cover on there. Obviously, it's a little bit of a marketing gimmick, but hey, I'm not going to give Boom Studios and James Tynion much crap because that's a tremendous amount of success. That's awesome. The other thing you'll notice is with all the Spawn comics and Saga, which obviously Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples just returned with that, is that amazing price point of $2.99. DC and Marvel, outside of, I think, the Looney Tunes comic over at DC, they aren't providing anything for that price point. And that's really one of the strategies that Todd McFarlane did to expand the notoriety and get people back into Spawn. Once I saw that $2.99 price point when it went down, I started reading Spawn again myself. And one of the cool things about Spawn that Todd McFarlane has done, he has tinkered with the Spawn universe and the character in the past, but I think he learned his lessons and he said, fuck that. Let's get back to Spawn stories. Let's pay off a lot of the stuff we've been building over the years. People came for Spawn, and he's really delivering what people want in Spawn. You go over to Marvel and DC, they're changing everything every single month. Obviously, the price decrease to $2.99 really helped the sales, and people started checking it out. But once they found out it was the Spawn comics that they liked before, they just stuck around. And now they've got this fully fleshed out Spawn universe. You got the Scorch, you got King Spawn, you got Spawn, you got Gunslinger Spawn, and they all sold over 40,000 issues in March by themselves. That's 4 different titles. That is a tremendous amount of success. And it's not shocking that Todd McFarlane would be the one to kind of break the code and say, listen, maybe if we go under what DC and Marvel are doing, we can get people to check out the product. In the past, Image normally cost more than Marvel and DC, but Marvel and DC's prices have gotten a little bit out of hand. $3.99 is essentially the industry standard now. But going under there and delivering something people like, obviously they're able to make the money up with the quantity that they're shipping there. And I think it was really smart for Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples to come back into the market after taking like a 2.5, 3-year hiatus on Saga and undercutting the price on their competitors and saying, you need to come back in and check out Saga. And obviously people decided to show back up. That was really smart marketing. That was a really good strategy. And people came along for the ride. A couple of other titles that we saw on that list selling over 30,000 copies were 2 of the shared superhero comics from Image Comics, part of that, I think it's called the Supermassive universe. It's basically Radiant Black, Radiant Red, and Red Sun. Obviously, Ryan Higgins has his own following and has really started to flesh out this shared comic book universe, and it's been a success. I think it's really cool that Image Comics is really trying to fill in the gap and say, you know what, maybe if you're not really into DC and Marvel right now, we've got Supermassive with a couple of really good writers that you know. And if you don't like that, we've got Spawn. It's a superhero universe. It's obviously shared. It's more of a horror genre superhero universe, but anything to provide competition for DC and Marvel is good these days because somebody needs to tell them to get their act together. And these guys are really challenging them. And we're seeing it in the sales themselves. Now, this isn't only isolated to the top-selling comics on the indie scene. Obviously, we've seen tremendous growth in there. But check this out. This came out from Comic-Con today. This absolutely backs up everything that we've just seen. Comparing Q1 from 2020 to Q1 of 2022, 192% increase in Image Comics sold, 46% increase in Boom Studio sales, 62% increase in Dynamite comics, 5% decrease from IDW, and then a 34% increase from everything else. Across the board, everything that's not Marvel and DC saw an increase of 74%. That is enormous. There are some major shifts going on in the direct market, and I think this is really healthy. We don't need a big 2. We need a big 4 or 5 that are all kind of challenging each other and really upping the game and the quality. I don't know about you, but I'm very excited to see this transformation of the direct market. Marvel and DC need more competitors. Fans, readers like us need more really good options out there, and seeing a lot of the best talents. You know, maybe there's still work at Marvel and DC, but they're not exclusive anymore. Go and do some really cool stuff on the indie scene. Go do something that's a little out of the superhero genre and see what happens. Obviously, people are reading comic books. We've seen the industry itself really is exploding, kind of on the backs of manga and Scholastic and whatnot. But there's no reason that traditional American comics publishing should be left behind. If anything, it should be growing with it. Maybe not at the same rate because the direct market is obviously smaller. There's less capital to invest in these comics. than you have at like Amazon or Barnes & Noble and some of these traditional big bookstores, obviously, that are really driving the sales of Scholastic and manga. But we don't want to see the direct market left in the dust. We don't want to see DC and Marvel become irrelevant. I don't want to see American comic books become irrelevant. I want to see Image really stand up and say, you know what, maybe we should be the #2 publisher out there. Superheroes aren't the only thing that people are reading nowadays. Most people are reading other stuff anyway. And it's very exciting to see the growth that's happening. I do have some indie comic books that I do want to recommend. There's some really good stuff out here. This is the stuff that I personally am reading and I'm really enjoying. From Image Comics, I'm definitely recommending Red Sun from Ryan Parrott. I really like that comic book series. It's a lot of fun. Also from Image, if you like horror, there's a really good horror anthology series out there. It's not an anthology as in there's 3 or 4 stories per comic book, but every comic book essentially is a one-shot. It's called Ice Cream Man, W. Maxwell Prince. It's been out for several years now. I think it's on issue number 30. These things are awesome. If you like horror, that's a really good series. Over at Dark Horse right now, we have Apache Delivery Service from Matt Kindt. He's also got his own imprint, I believe, starting up at Dark Horse in the near future. Hopefully I can get him on the channel. We can talk about it. Over at IDW, this is my favorite comic book right now. This series is essentially flawless. It's called The Killock, the Artisan Wraith. It's a sequel to one of my favorite series of last year. It's absolutely beautiful. It's by Livio Ramondelli. He's one of the best robot artists you'll ever see in comic books. He writes and illustrates it. The Killock, the Artisan Wraith, is badass. You will like that one if you're a sci-fi fan. Then from Ablaze. If you see Ablaze Comics in your comic shop, every comic book essentially is guaranteed to be at a minimum very good, and most of them are actually great. There's 2 series there that I love right now. The Sumerian series are awesome. These are Robert E. Howard Conan stories that have been adapted into comic book form. The art is beautiful, and they are faithful adaptations of the real Conan from Robert E. Howard. These destroy anything that Marvel's putting out there. The other series from Blaze that I definitely think you should be reading is Life Zero. Zombie comics isn't the most original thing in the history of the world, but this is illustrated by Marco Cicchetto. It's a really cool, adrenaline-fueled zombie comic with art that will absolutely knock your socks off. Definitely check out Life Zero. So I'm very excited to see these numbers from the indie comic seed. Definitely check out my videos on Sunday. Every Sunday, we recommend the very best comic books of the week. Normally, Drew from Comics Elite joins me. We always recommend more indie comics than Marvel and DC. Across the board, that is what happens every single Sunday. Also, I would like to invite you to watch this video. This is an interview I did with Matt Kindt. He's the writer I talked about from Apache Delivery Service. He's one of my favorite comic writers in the industry today. He's a really nice guy. It's a longer video. It's a little bit less than an hour, but we go over a lot of his career, a lot of the stuff he's worked on. Definitely recommend this. If you have some time, check this interview out. Matt Kindt is a great guy, and he's got some comic books you should be reading.